Well, the penalty for misleading is supposed to be resigning. So are you suggesting he should resign?
Well, I'll tell you what the bigger issue here is, Andrew, and we all get interested in the machinations of Parliament, but the big issue is this. We now have a Prime Minister who thinks that it's okay to bring people here on temporary visas with a view, presumably based on what Ed Husic just said, to making those permanent visas, to bring people here who may be supporters and sympathisers of Hamas, a terrorist group. Can you imagine any other Prime Minister in our history saying, for example, we're going to bring refugees to this country who support Al-Qaeda, who support ISIS? I mean, it's inconceivable that we are having a conversation in this country where the Prime Minister's defending a situation where supporters of Hamas, people who celebrated and supported what happened on October 7, are the people that we could be potentially letting into this country. It's an absolute outrage, and our first duty is to protect Australians, and we don't need supporters of Hamas, a bloodthirsty terrorist group in the vein of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, in this country. Now, the Prime Minister couldn't get up in Parliament and guarantee that there was nobody who supported or sympathised with Hamas. Instead, he came out and said, well, support of Hamas wouldn't be a reason not to grant
Mr.
a visa. It's an outrage.
Mr. Sukkar, the head of ASIO said that, though, in fairness. Is the opposition undermining the head of ASIO when he said it was okay for people with rhetorical Hamas sympathies, not terrorist sympathies, to come here?
Well, governments are ultimately the ones, we're elected by the people who direct and decide policy. And I can tell you right now, a coalition government would have as explicit policy that we would not allow Hamas supporters and sympathisers into this country. We've said very clearly we don't even want one Hamas supporter or sympathiser, a listed terrorist organisation in this country. That would be our policy. Now, it's clearly not this government's policy. But it's an outrage. And
why do you think they let them in on the visitor visas?
Well, Ed Husic seemed to bail the cat on that so they could bring them in more quickly. He said that explicitly. Now, I don't know if he said that accidentally. I don't know if he was given talking points to say that or whether the truth just slipped out. But basically what he confirmed is we are circumventing proper process to ensure the integrity of our migration system and ultimately to ensure the safety of Australians by having an expedited process that we know for a fact means some people have arrived here with no face-to-face checks, with not the usual sorts of checks that would be undertaken. And this idea that they're running an identical process to what the coalition government did, you quite rightly pointed out, Andrew, that in cases of the past, whether it be in relation to Syria or Afghanistan, refugees were taken to third countries and processed, in some cases up to 12 months, to make sure that we were thoroughly vetting every single application. This idea that you can bring somebody in on a visa in 24 hours and then just to glibly say, oh, well, we ran through the same processes, that 12-month process took for the coalition is outrageous. And I'd add this finally.
Why? Was my question.
Sorry, this is important.
Why do you think they've done this?
Well, Ed Husic, because they have a cavalier attitude, clearly, to this issue. They think that there's nothing wrong with bringing Hamas sympathisers and sympathisers and supporters potentially to this country. That is the fundamental disagreement here. Here the coalition says, we don't think it's proper to have Hamas supporters in this country, and clearly Labor feel as though that shouldn't be a criteria that would stop somebody from entering Australia on one of these visas.
It's been put to me that to even get through that Rafah crossing, the Israelis have to do their own checks on people. Do you accept that?
Well, I'll tell you what I'll accept. When the Prime Minister comes into Parliament and starts answering questions and takes us through exactly what's going on. But we know one thing for sure.
Is that appropriate to talk about national security, the various checks in the Parliament?
It is absolutely appropriate for the Prime Minister to make very clear, one way or the other, whether they believe that Hamas supporters of a terrorist organisation or sympathisers should be able to get their hands on one of their visas. Now, I think it's pretty clear at this stage they've said that wouldn't preclude you from getting a visa. So allow him to take us through that. Now, of course, there are details that you wouldn't disclose publicly. There's no doubt about that. But let's get back to the earlier point, Andrew. Anthony Albanese has said he is running an identical process to that of the coalition, and we've pointed to third-party processing and vetting that took, in some cases, up to 12 months, and he is seriously suggesting that his 24-hour turnaround is an equivalent process to what was being conducted then. It's a joke. And finally, Andrew, I'd add this. If you look at the Syria example as the most relevant recent comparison, we were bringing in people being persecuted by ISIS in that case, a terrorist organisation. We were bringing in people who were being persecuted by them. Now, the sticking point here is that the government could be potentially bringing in supporters and sympathisers of the listed terrorist organisation we're referring to. There's very little comparison between the two, and they're doing it in 24 hours.